This morning we are in Exodus. Ooh, and I put the candle out. Thankfully, it didn't catch. There we go. All right. During communion one time at the church in Virginia that I was serving at, during communion, I caught a little bit of the room. You'd think I'd learned by now. We know better. All right. When the people saw that Moses was so long in coming down from the mountain, they gathered around Aaron and said, "Come, make us gods who will go before us." As for this fellow Moses, who brought us out of Egypt, we don't know what has happened to him. Aaron said to them, "Take off the gold earrings from that your wives, your sons, and your daughters are wearing, and bring them to me." So all the people took off their earrings and brought them to Aaron, and he took what they handed him, and he made it into an idol cast, and then idol cast into the shape of a calf and fashioned it with a tool. Then they said, "These are your gods, O Israel, who brought you up out of Egypt." When Aaron saw this, he built an altar in front of the calf and announced, "Tomorrow there will be a great festival to the Lord." So the next day the people rose early and sacrificed burnt offerings and presented fellowship offerings. And afterwards they sat down to eat and drink and got up to indulge in revelry. Then the Lord said to Moses, "Go down because your people, whom you brought up out of Egypt, have become corrupt. They have been quick to turn away from what I commanded them and have made themselves an idol cast in the shape of a calf. They have bowed down to it and sacrificed to it and have said, 'These are your gods, O Israel, who brought you out of Egypt.' I have seen these people," the Lord said to Moses, "and they are a stiff-necked people. Now leave me alone so that my anger may burn against them and I may destroy them. Then I will make you into a great nation." But Moses sought the favor of the Lord his God. "O Lord," he said, "why should your anger burn against your people whom you brought out of Egypt with great power and a mighty hand? Why should the Egyptians say that it was with evil intent that he brought them out to kill them in the mountain and to wipe them off the face of the earth? Turn from your fierce anger and relent, and do not bring disaster on your people. Remember your servants, Abraham, Isaac, and Israel, to whom you swore by your own self, 'I will make your descendants as numerous as the stars in the sky, and I will give your descendants all this land I promised them, and it will be their inheritance forever.' Then the Lord relented, did not bring on his people the disaster he had threatened." This is the word of God for the people of God. Thanks be to God. A friend of mine several years ago got a distressing phone call, and he was a paramedic, and he was working as a paramedic during this time, and he got this call from 911, and he went and he found that there was this heroin addict who was on the verge of death in an abandoned apartment building. And when my friend got to the apartment, the man was huddled in a corner and shivering, and the man was unresponsive, and he was surrounded by rotten trash and all the paraphernalia of heroin addiction. And when I asked him what that was like, my friend told me that it was terrifying, but he also thought that it was probably the first time that he fully understood what worship looked like. If you've ever spoken for any length of time to a drug addict, you might understand just a little bit about what my friend is talking about. Worship of the drug, whatever. In this case, the object was heroin, and like all idolatry, which is counterfeit worship, it doesn't lead us to the promised land. Humans, we're not created to be godless, and if we don't know the true God, we'll make our own deities Or we'll create our own things to fill that God-shaped void in our lives. It's a sign of our finitude and a subconscious awareness that we need direction, we need purpose, and we need relationship with something, with someone bigger than ourselves. A wise person once wrote, "The desire for God is the most fundamental appetite of all." And it's an appetite that we can never eliminate. We may seek to disown it, but it will not go away. If we deny that it's there, we shall in fact only divert it to some other object or range of objects. And that will mean that we invest in some creature or creatures. We will invest in them the burden of our need for God, and it's a burden which no creature can possibly carry or live up to. The story of the Bible is the story of God. It's the story of humankind. It's the story of us. It's the story of God to rebuild our broken relationship. And we see this story played out from the Old Testament to the New Testament. We see this story played out in all of human history. We see this story played out in our daily lives, on the playgrounds, at school, in offices, in tall skyscrapers, and at home. It's the story of a lost people and a story of a loving God. It's a story of a very weak people and a very strong God. It's a story of a God who seeks us out and a people who often don't want to be found. In our story from Exodus, we see a people who had really been given a lot. Never, ever before had a people been so privileged as Israel. They had just been liberated, set free after 400 years in slavery. Their nation was being born, the nation of Israel, and they would soon be given a homeland. And they were chosen by God to be God's followers, to be the people of God. And they were to be God's witnesses to all the other nations of the earth, witnessing to the truth, being the true light to the one and the one who draws all persons to the one living God. Didn't live up to it too well, but that's why Jesus had to come. Moses had gone up on Mount Sinai to receive the civil and religious laws of God, the laws that were to form them into a nation and govern them as a people. But abruptly and sadly, a catastrophic tragedy struck. All because they thought Moses had been on the mountain for too long. They got diverted in their attention. They got impatient. And instead of trusting God and waiting upon Him, the people chose to take things into their own hands and do their own thing, go their own way. And thus we have this sad, terrible tragedy and ridiculous experience of the golden calf. Does it sound familiar, though? Does it sound familiar in any way? Can you relate to it? Can we relate to the people of Israel? How often do we lose our faith and trust in the God who has chosen and delivered us and instead choose on our own to take matters into our own hands and to do our own thing and to go our own way? And what happens when we do this? Not only do we miss out on the good plans God has for our lives, we also fail to love God and our neighbor and experience the abundant life that Jesus offers and wants for us. When the people saw that Moses was so long in coming down from the mountain, they gathered around Aaron and they said, "Make gods for us that will go before us. And as for this fellow Moses that brought us out of Egypt, we don't know what's happened to him." In other words, they're looking for a quick fix, something to fill that God-shaped void, and anything will do. Anything will do. So Aaron makes a golden calf and proclaims it as their god or gods. And we watch as they move back into the realm of darkness, confusion, and really slavery. In no time flat. And it sure can't happen fast, can it not? One moment, we're being rescued from slavery to sin and death by following the risen Christ, and the next we find ourselves once again in bondage to the very things that caused us so much pain and confusion in the first place. We live in a society, in a world that is so rife with self-absorption and materialism. And we try to live our commitments to worship and read the Bible and pray and serve others. And when we do this, we find a real freedom in it. And we find ourselves growing and maturing as Christians. And we find ourselves having a love for others that we never knew we could ever have, and a zest for life that we never knew even existed, and a happiness and a joy that transcends all understanding that we've never experienced before. And we find ourselves becoming and growing into these new creations that the Bible promises will happen. And then something happens and our attention gets diverted, and maybe the going gets tough and our faith gets tested. And when this happens, do we continue to abide in our true sources of strength, or do we quickly run to our golden calves? The malls, politics, television, the internet, the NFL, the refrigerator, anger, self-pity, self-absorption, money, the local drug dealer, whatever it is, name it. You know what it is in your life. The quality of our Christian journeys, the quality of our lives, the effectiveness of our witness for Jesus Christ depends on our choices. And as Christians today, we are just as susceptible to the lure of the golden calf as the Israelites were so long ago. What is your golden calf? What is my golden calf? It's not difficult to be lured away by the golden calves of this world. We're surrounded by a plethora of things that call out for our devotion, cry out for our devotion. And when we allow ourselves to focus on these merciless idols, we quickly find ourselves drifting away from God. And as we drift away from God, we begin to forget what is truly meaningful in this life. We find it harder, if not impossible, to follow the teachings of Christ. Soon, instead of turning the other cheek, we might be the ones who are doing the hitting. Instead of forgiving others without limit, we might be holding grudges that build walls between ourselves and our fellow human beings. Anger, jealousy engulf us. Anxiety and insecurity enshroud us. And we find that our Christian faith doesn't mean so much to us anymore as we grope around in the darkness of our world, where our relationship with God is broken and blurred. And we return to living life in the carnal, sinful, fleshly sense, which only brings us doom, gloom, defeat, and ultimately death. In our Old Testament lesson for this morning, people's actions, sure, deserved condemnation. They turned from God, but God ultimately does not turn away from them. The Bible is our story, my story, your story. We, like so many others who have lived before us, are groping for a relationship with God. And oftentimes we get off track. We go chasing other dreams that are just that, dreams, which will soon turn into nightmares until we come to the point where we stop, repent, and return to our one true source of strength. The kind, compassionate, grace-filled, and loving God who never, ever stops loving us or stops calling us into new life with Him. No matter how far we stray, no matter how crazy the things we do are. It's about grace and judgment, isn't it? But maybe not in the way that we might normally think of grace and judgment. The judgment comes as God because of freedom of choice, allows us to live into the consequences of our own decisions, to take things into our own hands. The grace abounds as we accept the free gift of God's unmerited invitation, which allows us to live in God's decisions and reap the wonderful benefits of God's plan for our lives. God is calling every one of us to throw away the golden calf, whatever that may be for you or for me, and understand the need that we have for him and the ridiculousness of those golden calves, and instead to embrace the salvation and the abundant life made available to us through the death and resurrection of Jesus Christ. And in doing so, we will find ourselves walking into and walking in the promised land. I'd like to ask us all to bow our heads, close our eyes, and as we do so, I want us to think about, what is my golden calf? Don't worry about what somebody next to you, what their golden calf might be, or what somebody down the street, what their golden calf might be, or whatever somebody else's golden calf might be. Think about yourself for a change. Think about what your golden calf might be. What haunts your life? What seeks to steal your joy and God's purpose for your life? Think about that for a few minutes. Now picture yourself taking that golden calf, whatever it is may be, and taking it to the foot of the cross and giving it